The garden party at Lord Weston's Grosvenor Square house was not the sort of occasion that admitted Cecily Marsh. She was admitted through the tradesman's entrance, along the passage that smelled of warming wax and old stone, and she carried in both arms a parcel tied in brown paper that contained the new waistcoat Sir Frederick Weston had commissioned in January and collected 3 times for fittings without once paying in full. She was not there to enjoy the late afternoon light on the terrace or the pale green of the lawn or the sound of the string quartet setting up under the elm. She was there to deliver the parcel, collect the remaining sum, and go. It was the coat that stopped her. She had come out through the side door, cutting across the lower terrace to reach the service gate, when she saw him among the guests. A tall man, broad-shouldered, standing at the edge of the terrace with his back half-turned to the garden, and his attention on no one in particular. Dark navy tailcoat, brass buttons, high white cravat. The silhouette was correct. The posture was correct. She knew that cut, though. She had pinned the shoulder seams herself, in her father's back workroom 3 winters ago, watching her father's chalk marks on navy wool and thinking she had never seen such fine cloth in her life. She stopped walking. The coat was wrong. Not glaringly, not to anyone who had not spent 4 days with the original beneath their hands. The lapel's roll was a 1/4 inch too shallow. The left breast sat a 1/2 inch too wide. Someone had copied her father's work from a pattern or a memory, and they had almost succeeded. The man wearing it turned slightly, and she saw his face, angular, composed, with eyes so dark they registered as black at this distance. She did not know his name. She knew only that he was wearing a coat someone had made without her father's hand in it, and that the original coat, the true commission, was hanging on its stand in the back room of the shop on Bruton Street, because the Duke of Keldmore had never returned to collect it. She collected herself. She tucked the parcel more firmly under her arm and walked toward the gate. A woman's voice, low and carrying, reached her from the terrace as she passed beneath it. "Do not trouble yourself with the needle girl. She is here to collect her coin and go." Cecily did not slow her steps. She let herself out through the iron gate and walked back to Bruton Street in the yellow, late afternoon light. The parcel lighter now, the coin in her pocket, and the image of the wrong coat and the right posture sitting behind her eyes like a splinter she could not reach to draw. The shop had belonged to Edmund Marsh for 31 years. It occupied the ground floor and the basement of a narrow building on Bruton Street, and it smelled of wool dust and cedar and the sharp mineral scent of shears recently honed. Edmund kept the shears even now, though his hands could no longer manage them reliably. They hung on the wall behind the cutting table like a certificate of office, and Cecily kept them oiled. Her father was upstairs. He had been upstairs for the better part of 2 seasons, a damp cough having settled in his chest the previous winter, and declined to leave. Dr. Hartwell came on Tuesdays. He was kind and honest, which was worse than being kind and vague, because he told them clearly what the cough was doing, and what it would eventually accomplish. Edmund received this information the way he received most things, with a slight nod and a request for more light, and then he reached for the small notebook in which he kept his remaining commissions and told Cecily which work still needed finishing. There was not much. The shop had thinned. 3 commissions had transferred to Weston and Doyle when word spread that Edmund was unwell. 2 others had simply stopped answering correspondence. What remained was Sir Frederick's waistcoat, which was now collected, a riding coat for a young Mr. Pemberton, which was half finished and sitting on the stand in the front, and the navy tailcoat with brass buttons for the Duke of Keldmore, which had been finished and waiting for 3 years, and was never collected, and for which no final payment had ever come. Her father did not speak of the coat directly. He sometimes looked at the door to the back room with an expression Cecily had learned to read as memory rather than planning. He had made the coat during what he called the good season, the last season before his hands began to fail him, and he had sewn it with the particular care he reserved for work he thought might outlast him. The hidden pocket had been his idea as much as the Duke's. Edmund had constructed it inside the left breast, invisible from outside, its opening disguised in the seam of the inner lining so that a man's hand could reach it without the motion being visible at all. Fine ivory thread, a particular stitch that was her father's signature and no one else's. To carry what you cannot set down, her father had said, which was all he would say about the instruction. She had found the miniature on the afternoon. She finished the lining. It had been tucked into the seam of the original inner lining, the one the Duke had evidently left behind when he dropped the coat for the commission and departed. A small oval painting in a gilt frame no wider than her thumb, a woman in white with dark hair and a quiet expression, the kind of face that looked at the painter as though it had already decided to love him. On the back, in small, neat letters, E 1811. She had placed it in the shallow drawer beside the cutting table, under the chalk dusters, and told herself it was simply an object left in a garment, as objects often were, and that it would be returned when the coat was collected. The coat had not been collected. She looked at the miniature sometimes when the shop was quiet. She did not know the woman's name. She knew only that the image had been meant for the hidden pocket, which had been meant to be carried close, which meant it had been meant to be irreplaceable. The bell above the shop door rang on a Wednesday morning 9 days after the garden party. Cecily was at the cutting table with Mr. Bird, Pemberton's riding coat, unpicking a seam she had sewn incorrectly the evening before, when the light failed and her judgment failed with it. She looked up and went still. He was taller than he had appeared across a terrace. The navy coat on his back was the copy, the wrong one, and she could see now in the indoor light precisely where the lapel deviated from her father's design. His eyes, when he looked at her, were not quite black, but very close to it, and they moved across the room with the particular quality of attention that takes in the whole space without settling. "I require a word with the master," he said. "My father is unwell," Cecily said. "I manage the commissions." He looked at her more carefully. "You are his daughter." "I am." He came to the counter. His hands, folded loosely before him, were large and still. "I am Keldmore," he said. "I had a commission here 3 years ago. I understand it may not have been collected." The floor did not shift under her feet, but it considered it. "The coat is in the back room," she said. "It is finished." Something crossed his face that was not quite surprise, and not quite its opposite. "Finished," he said. "My father finished it before his illness. It has been waiting." He said nothing for a moment. His jaw was still. His eyes had moved to a point just past her shoulder, which was where the door to the back room was. "I should like to see it," he said. "I will bring it out." "I would rather see it in place." She considered, refusing. She considered many things in the space of that silence. Then she came around the counter and led him through to the back room, which was narrow and lit by the north window, and smelled more strongly of cedar in here. And she lifted the coat from its stand and held it out to him. He did not take it immediately. He stood in the center of the narrow room and looked at it with an expression she had no name for, something that lived between recognition and the wish not to recognize, and then he reached for it and held it in both hands without putting it on. And his thumb moved, once, to the inside left breast, to where the pocket was. "I should like to commission a second garment," he said after a long moment. His voice was level, but something in it had shifted, the way a stone shifts when water has been working beneath it for long enough. "A waistcoat. I will require several fittings." She understood that this was not entirely about the waistcoat. She also understood that she should not say so. "I will note the commission," she said. He came for the first fitting on a Friday. She had the waistcoat half-pinned when she understood that standing this close to him required a quality of attention she had not anticipated. He was still in the way that very self-possessed men are still, not rigidly, but as though the decision not to move were itself a form of control. She worked along the left seam with her chalk and her pins and said nothing, and he said nothing, and the silence in the shop had a particular texture that she filed away without naming. "Your father took the measurement for this commission himself," she said, because the silence required something to fill it. "He did," Philip said. His voice was level. Flat, almost. In the way that voices go flat when they are carrying something. "He was precise," she said. "He was exact," Philip said. There is a difference." She did not answer. She pinned the shoulder and moved to the right side, and she was aware with the particular accuracy of a woman who has spent 24 years making things fit human bodies, that his was a body holding itself together with discipline, rather than ease. And funness. And he came for the second on the following Tuesday. He did not make conversation exactly, but he asked questions. About the seam weights. About the chalk lines. About whether her father had trained her formally or simply brought her into the work as a child. He listened to her answers with the same quality of attention he had turned on the room during his first visit, and each time he left behind the faint impression that the question he had actually wanted to ask was not the one he had voiced. On the third Tuesday, she arrived at the shop at 7:30 in the morning to find a small girl sitting on the step outside the door. The girl was perhaps 10 years old, thin-wristed, with ink on both her hands that matched the ink on Cecily's right index finger, and she was holding a scrap of cloth with the careful grip of someone who did not want to be found holding it wrong. Her name was Dora. She was the daughter of the woman who sold vegetables in the street 2 blocks over, and her mother had sent her with a cloth and a note that said only, "Miss Marsh. She has nimble fingers and nowhere for them to go. I cannot afford an apprenticeship. I am sorry to ask." Cecily read the note twice. Then she opened the shop and sat the girl at the cutting table and began teaching her how to hold the needle. She began with the basic running stitch, which Dora already knew badly and needed to learn well. She demonstrated the angle of the wrist, the even pressure of the thumb against the cloth, the particular rhythm that keeps the lines straight without pulling the fabric off grain. Dora watched with an intensity that was recognizable, the look of someone who understands that what is being offered is a form of currency. They worked for 2 hours that first morning. Dora's stitches were uneven and too large, and improved noticeably by the end of the second row. Cecily told her to come back Thursday. She came back Wednesday instead, and on Friday, and by the following Monday she was threading her own needle without being shown. She did not know anyone was watching on the third Tuesday, which was the morning Dora was working on a strip of plain linen at the end of the cutting table, her thin wrist moving with concentration, and Cecily was talking her through the correction she needed to make to the tension without touching the cloth herself, because sometimes the lesson required the hands to find the answer on their own. She found out when he came for the fourth fitting and stood for a moment at the door before she heard him and looked up. He had the expression of a man who has seen something and does not intend to say so. "You are not open yet," he said. "I am always open," she said. He came inside and allowed her to pin the waistcoat for the third time, and neither of them mentioned Dora. His eyes moved once to the small stool pushed against the wall where Dora had been sitting, and something in the line of his mouth changed very slightly. "The girl," he said after a long pause. "Is she placed?" "She comes in mornings," Cecily said. "Her mother cannot afford a proper indenture." He said nothing. His jaw was set. She pinned the left side, and he stood without comment, the way he always stood, as though enduring being touched was simply another requirement of the morning. "She has quick hands," Cecily said. "She will be good." He said nothing for another moment. Then quietly, "See that she is." It was not an offer. It was a command, which was how he expressed most things. She recognized it much later, for what it was. He had seen her. Not the coat she made, not the shop she ran, not the daughter of the man who owed him a finished garment. Her. If she had known that then, perhaps what came after would not have surprised her so badly. The original coat was still on its stand when he came on a Thursday afternoon, the 6th Thursday since the first visit, and she made the error of having forgotten to move it before he arrived. He saw it through the open door. He said nothing. He came through the door without being invited, which he had not done before, and stood in front of the coat on its stand, and this time his face held nothing she could read at all. "My father finished this himself," she said. Before his hands, he reached out and touched the lapel. Not the outside, the inside. The place where the lining met the seam. His fingers moved along the edge where the hidden pocket was, and she watched his expression change, very slowly, like ice when the light hits it at the right angle. "She died," he said, "in September of 1814. 3 years ago." "In September." She said nothing. "I brought the coat here because Edmund Marsh was the best in London, and because I could not carry what I needed to carry through a season of dinners and assemblies in a way that anyone could see." He was still looking at the coat. "I left before the final fitting because in October there was nothing I could face going anywhere for. And I did not come back because coming back meant this." He stopped. "Coming back meant what?" she said very quietly. "Accepting that I had left her here." He turned then and looked at Cecily directly, and what was in his face was not the composed attention she had come to expect, but something much older than that. Something that had been waiting inside the discipline for 3 years, like a seed under frost. "The pocket is empty," he said. She crossed to the cutting table. She opened the shallow drawer beside the chalk dusters. She took out the small oval miniature and held it out to him without speaking. He looked at it. He looked at her. He did not reach for it immediately. "She was with the lining," Cecily said. "She has been here all along." He took it from her hand. His fingers closed around it. He stood for a long time without moving, and she did not speak, or move either. And the sound of Bruton Street came in through the north window, faint and ordinary, and nothing about the room felt ordinary at all. 3 years, he said finally. 3 years. He looked at her again. She did not know what he found in her face. But whatever it was, it cost him something to look at it. And she saw him decide not to look away. The miniature was still in his hand. After a moment he turned it over, and she saw his thumb move across the painted surface in one very slow pass, the way you might touch something you had thought was gone. Then he set it on the cutting table between them, face up, and looked at it, and did not speak. She was standing close enough that she could see the rise of his chest, the particular quality of a breath, carefully controlled. The room was quiet. Outside Bruton Street went about its business unhurried and ordinary, and in here there was only the cedar smell and the north light and the fact of the woman in the miniature regarding them both from the surface of the cutting table. His hand, when he reached for the miniature, again brushed hers. He had not intended it. She was certain he had not intended it, because every movement he made in this room was deliberate, and this one was not. His fingers were warm and slightly rough at the knuckle, and the contact lasted less than a second, but her pulse registered it in her wrist and in her throat, that involuntary arithmetic the body performs that has nothing to do with permission. He did not acknowledge it. She did not acknowledge it. He picked up the miniature and held it, and she stood very still beside the cutting table with her hands at her sides and her pulse doing what it would. It was the day she understood that she was in danger of something she had told herself was impossible for a tradesman's daughter in a needle-stained apron with chalk dust on her wrist. She understood this, and she said nothing, and she put the understanding away in a place she did not intend to visit, and she told him the final fitting would be Thursday next. She received the summons from the Ashmore house on a Monday. It was not addressed to her name, but to Marsh and Daughter, as though she were the shop and not a person, and it requested her attendance at 2 o'clock for a fitting adjustment. This was a lie. She understood it was a lie when she was shown not into the dressing room but into the small drawing room on the ground floor, where the Dowager Duchess of Keldmore sat in a gilt chair with her black lace fan held at the precise angle of a woman who has rehearsed the scene. Miss Louisa Fenn was on the sofa, in white silk, her golden ringlets arranged with the attention of someone who had been told to be present and knew why. There were 3 other women in the room, none of whom Cecily had seen before, all of them watching her in the way that a room watches something it has already decided about. "You are the needle girl," the Dowager said. "Sit down." Cecily did not sit. "Your letter mentioned an alteration, my lady. I mentioned nothing of the sort." Lady Ashmore opened her fan and considered the painted silk of it. I am given to understand that you have been attending my son twice weekly in Bruton Street, under the pretense of a commission. You will understand that I have made enquiries. The Duke commissioned a waistcoat, Cecily said. The work is nearly complete. The waistcoat was completed a fortnight ago. Lady Ashmore's pale blue eyes moved from the fan to Cecily's face. You are a needlegirl, Miss Marsh. You make things for other people's lives. That is your station, and it is enough. She paused, with the precision of someone deploying a blade. The Duke of Keldmore has accepted the Fen settlement. It will be announced at the Blackwood Assembly on Thursday evening. I thought it charitable to inform you directly rather than allow you to continue under a misapprehension that can only cause you embarrassment. Miss Fenn looked at her hands. Cecily looked at the dowager. She held the look for one long moment, long enough that she felt the other women in the room shift with discomfort. Then she reached into her kit and folded her measuring tape into its case and fastened the clasp with 2 turns. Thank you, my lady, she said. She walked out. She walked the length of Grosvenor Street, and then she turned into Mount Street and stood in a doorway for 3 minutes where no one could see her, and she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had been told, which was not only the engagement, but the confirmation of everything she had believed before she had stopped believing it. The dowager had been right in the way that a woman whose entire world is made of correct categories is always right about the categories. A needlegirl made things. She did not become the thing she made. She did not walk through the front door. She did not sit at the dinner table. She delivered the garment and collected her coin and went back to Bruton Street. This was the natural order, and the natural order had endured for 30 years in the Marsh household and would endure for 30 more, and there was nothing wrong with it, and nothing to grieve in it, and it was fine, and she was fine. And she straightened her Spencer jacket and walked back to Bruton Street. She had not intended to stop in front of the milliner's window on Bond Street. She stopped anyway. The window held a display of spring bonnets in cream and pale yellow, dressed on stands with the particular artful negligence that was itself a form of craft. Someone had made those. Someone with nimble fingers and a good eye had dressed each stand with care and set the whole to catch the afternoon light from the west. She looked at them for a long moment, and then she walked on. She was on Bruton Street when a woman she knew by sight, Mrs. Tanner, a seamstress who took in alterations from the larger shops, caught up to her. Mrs. Tanner had a particular expression of careful sympathy, which meant she was bearing news she had been given and was uncertain what to do with. I heard it at the Barnsley Music Hall last week, Mrs. Tanner said, after a greeting and a pause. Lady Ashmore was speaking to the senior ladies. She said the needlegirl has been haunting Bruton Street all winter, that the Duke requires a tailor, not a wife. She paused. I thought you ought to know that it was being said. Cecily thanked her. She went inside. She sat with her father that evening. She told him the Keldmore commission was concluded. He reached for her hand without asking why her voice was flat, because he was her father, and he knew. You are not only your work, he said. She did not answer. She watched his chest rise and fall, and the fire in the grate, and the small watercolor of her mother above the mantelpiece that had been there as long as she could remember. Her mother had been a schoolmaster's daughter who married a tailor and had called it the best decision of her life. Her mother had worked beside Edmund at the cutting table until the year Cicely was born, and she had known how to press a seam and set a lapel and hold a chalk line without a rule. She had also laughed without covering her mouth and had opinions about books and had sat at dinner tables where she was not the highest station present, and she had not found any of this a difficulty. Cecily did not know what her mother would have said about this. She thought she might have said something very dry and very quiet, and then gone back to the cutting table. She went down in the morning and she worked. She did not stop for Thursday. The Blackwood Assembly took place in a house on Brook Street whose ballroom could accommodate 200 guests. It could not accommodate Cecily Marsh among them, but it could accommodate a dressmaker's assistant engaged for the evening to manage the emergency alterations that inevitably arose when 200 people in tight silk spent 3 hours dancing. She had taken this engagement 2 months prior, before the garden party, before the waistcoat commissions, before all of it. She had not thought to cancel it. She stood near the corridor behind the ballroom in her plain dark spencer and white muslin, with a small kit of needles and thread and pins, and she listened to the orchestra and watched the candlelight shift through the doorway and waited to be needed. She had been needed twice already in the first hour. A torn hem on a young woman's white muslin, a quick repair with white thread and a straight pin, done in the corridor in 3 minutes. A loose button on an older gentleman's coat, which required a longer needle and a different weight of thread, and the kind of quiet competence that goes unremarked when it succeeds. She worked, and she did not think about the assembly beyond its immediate requirements, which was a skill she had developed across many years, of making things for rooms she was not invited into. The room was full. She could see portions of it through the gap in the door, the pale glitter of diamonds, the movement of fans, the ordered social machinery of the London season operating at its highest register. She could see Lady Ashmore near the far wall, silver and upright, with Miss Fenn arranged at her side, the golden ringlets and the white silk and the pearls. Miss Fenn was beautiful, in the way that a woman is beautiful when the whole world has cooperated to produce her beauty. The right gown, and the right jewels, and the right expression of composed expectation. She held a small ivory reticule. Her gloves were white to the elbow. She looked exactly like the correct answer to a question. Cecily now understood she had never been intended to answer. She could see the small cluster of senior women beside the dowager, and the procedural stillness of a man she recognized as a solicitor from the leather document case he held at his side. The document case was brown leather, worn at the corners, the kind that gets that way from years of being set on tables. A man who carries a case that worn has attended many significant occasions. This one appeared to be waiting to become significant. She turned away from the door and checked the pin count in her kit and told herself she was not waiting for anything. She was looking at the document case when Philip Ashmore walked through the far door. He had the original coat on his back. She knew it immediately. The lapels rolled, the precise angle of the shoulder, the particular way the navy sat in the candlelight, all of it exactly as her father had intended. He had gone back to Bruton Street for it. He had collected it and dressed in it and worn it. Here he stood in the doorway for a moment, and the room shifted slightly, in the way that rooms shift when a person with a particular weight of attention enters them. Lady Ashmore began to move. Miss Fenn's head turned. The solicitor with the document case started toward the center of the floor. Philip looked across the room. He looked through the gap in the door where Cecily was standing. He crossed to her in the time it took her to understand he had seen her. Not to his mother, not to the solicitor, not to the assembled guests. Across the ballroom floor, past the turning heads, and the lowered fans, and the sound of Lady Ashmore's voice saying something sharp and quiet to Miss Fenn. He walked directly to the corridor door where Cecily stood with her kit of needles and a plain, dark jacket and chalk dust on her wrist. He stopped a foot from her. His eyes moved once to the kit and once back to her face. He did not offer a greeting. He did not acknowledge the room behind him. He was looking at her the way he had looked at the coat on its stand in the back room of the shop, with the particular quality of seeing that takes in everything and withholds nothing, and she was suddenly aware of the ink stain on her right index finger, and the chalk dust at her wrist, and the plain gray cotton of her gloves. All of it exactly what she was, and none of it hidden. "Miss Marsh made this coat," he said, and his voice carried level and clear into the ballroom behind him, into the held-breath silence that had fallen as the room understood what was happening. "She will be my wife." 12 words. The syllables fell into the stillness of the room with the deliberate precision of a man who had thought about each one. The dowager's fan dropped 3 inches. It did not fall entirely. It dropped, and everyone saw it drop. The women nearest Lady Ashmore did not look at her. That, more than anything, was the measure of the evening's shift. When a figure of authority diminishes, the crowd's first instinct is to look away from the diminishment rather than increase it. They looked at Philip. They looked at Cecily. One older woman near the fireplace, whom Cecily did not recognize, nodded once, a small and decisive motion, as though confirming a verdict she had been waiting to deliver. Miss Fenn looked down at her hands. She had the expression of a woman who had been told her whole life that she was the correct answer, and who had just learned that the question she had been rehearsing was not the one being asked. She was not undone. She was simply displaced. And there is a difference, and to her credit, she held herself with a quiet composure that earned no pity and required none. Mr. Silas Vane's solicitor adjusted the document case under his arm. He had been engaged, Cecily would later understand, not for the Fenn settlement, but for something else entirely. Something that had been arranged quietly, deliberately, across several weeks of Tuesday and Thursday visits to a shop on Bruton Street. He nodded once to Philip, and Philip inclined his head, and the crowd around them registered this small procedural exchange and settled into a new understanding of the evening. Cecily did not move for a moment. The candlelight was very warm. The orchestra, which had faltered to a stop, began again quietly, at first, and then finding its footing. Someone near the door to the supper room said something to the person beside them that she could not hear, and the person beside them replied, and the room began the slow business of returning to itself, which is what rooms do when the significant thing has already happened. Philip took one step toward her and offered his hand, not his arm, his bare hand, and this was a transgression of propriety that the room registered, and that she registered, and that she understood was the point. She took it. His fingers closed around her gloved hand, with care, the particular careful grip of a man who holds things he is afraid of dropping, and he stood still, and neither of them spoke, and the room breathed around them like a held tide finally releasing. "The coat was waiting," he said, low enough that only she heard it. 3 years, she said. "I was not ready," he said. "And then I was. And I did not know how to say so to someone with chalk on her wrist in a shop on Bruton Street." She looked up at him. The candlelight was on his face, and she could see the line of the scar at his collar, and the deep, dark eyes and the quality of attention that had no performance in it. "You could have simply said so," she said. Something shifted in his face that she had not seen there before almost. Very nearly, something like relief expressed as the beginning of a smile. "Next time," he said, "I will. If you have stayed with this story until now, leave a word in the quiet below. Some of us need to hear that others felt it too." The shop on Bruton Street did not close. Cecily had been clear about that, and Philip had been clear that he had no wish to close it, and the two clearnesses had met in the solicitor's office with Mr. Straden. Vane End emerged as a settlement that satisfied the shop's remaining debts, and provided for Edmund's care, and left the commission book in Cecily's hands to manage, as she saw fit. Edmund Marsh heard the news on a Friday morning, with Cecily sitting beside his bed, and the sound of Dora working the seams on the ground floor below them, the girl's movements careful and increasingly accurate. He listened to all of it. He did not say much. He reached for her hand again, as he had 3 weeks before, and this time his face had an expression she had not seen in 2 years. Something open and forward-looking that had nothing to do with accounts or commissions. "Your mother would have said she saw it coming," he told her. "She would have," Cecily said, "and she would have been lying." He laughed. It was a thin sound, frayed at the edges by the cough, but it was a laugh, and it filled the small room in a way that made everything in it seem more inhabitable. The miniature sat on the mantelpiece in the bedroom of the house in Upper Brook Street that had been the Keldmore townhouse, and would become their house, a word she was still learning to use without flinching. Philip had placed it there himself on the evening he brought her to see the rooms, before anything had been formally announced, in a gesture that she understood was not erasure, but accommodation. Eleanor was part of what he carried. The pocket had not been empty all those years. It had been waiting to be repurposed. She would not ask him to lay it down. The coat hung in the dressing room, the original, finally on the back it had been made for. She had looked at it once, in the afternoon light, and found that all of it was as she remembered. The lapel's precise roll, the shoulder seams, pinned by her own hands, the ivory thread in the hidden pocket stitching with the particular looping signature her father had taught her. She had slid her hand inside the left breast, into the pocket. He had put something in it. A folded note. Small, written in his careful, even hand. It said only this: "Miss Marsh, you made this coat, and everything else." On the morning of the first Sunday of the following March, with the light coming through the upper windows of the Brook Street house at the pale golden angle of early spring, Cecily sat in the small sitting room off the upstairs landing and worked on a piece of embroidery she had no talent for and had taken up anyway, because Edmund said idle hands were waste of engineering. The fire was lit. Outside the window, the street held the particular quality of a city still deciding whether it was winter or spring. Philip came in without announcing himself and sat in the chair across from her. He had the coat on, the original, because he wore it whenever he was not required to be formal, which she had noticed and not yet said anything about. He watched her make a mistake in the embroidery, correct it, and make the same mistake again. "Your father taught you to sew," he said. "He taught me to sew well," she said. "This is something else." He was quiet. The fire shifted. Somewhere below she could hear the house beginning its morning. A door, a footstep, the sound of someone setting things in order. She set down the embroidery and looked across at him. He had his hand resting in his lap in that particular still way of his, and the morning light was on his face, and she could see the small line of the scar at his collar above the cravat. She crossed the room and sat on the arm of his chair, which was not the posture of a duchess, and was exactly the posture she intended. He shifted slightly to make room without surprise, as though he had been expecting this, and one of his hands came up to rest at her waist, a steady, careful weight. She laid her own hand on the coat's lapel. The navy wool was warm from his skin, and the fire, and the morning. Under her fingers she could feel the particular weight of the cloth her father had loved, the way it held its shape without effort, the way it would go on holding its shape for years after both of them. The ink stain on her right index finger rested against the navy like a small familiar mark. She left her hand there. The pocket, inside the left breast, held what it held. She did not need to check. She already knew.